Welcome, distinguished and representatives of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, dear speakers, dear participants in the room, thank you for joining our side event today. It is co-organized by SMINA Human Rights Center, the National Office of the Crimean Platform and Human Rights House Foundation, with the kind support of national delegations to the Council of Europe from Ukraine, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, and several PACE members. My name is Nora Wehofsits, working as an international advocacy officer with Human Rights House Foundation in Brussels. Human Rights House Foundation works with human rights houses, coalitions of national human rights organizations, including the Human Rights House Crimea, in exile in Kiev, and Human Rights House Chernihiv. We welcome the opportunity to discuss with you today about the human rights situation in the occupied Crimea on the backdrop of the war going on in Ukraine. This side event provides an opportunity to hear about Ukrainian human rights organizations' new research and their monitoring and documentation efforts on human rights violations in the occupied Crimea. We will get information about intensified politically motivated persecutions, as well as the human rights implications of increasing militarization of the peninsula. Occupied Crimea provides a longer-term illustration of what happens to human rights in territories that Russia occupies and illegally tries to annex. The situation has been dire in Crimea for 8 years and since February 2022 deteriorated drastically. Enforced disappearances have returned for the first time since 2016, and unprecedented pressure has been exerted on human rights defenders, including independent lawyers and journalists. The event today will focus on further steps for Council of Europe member states to support Ukrainian human rights defenders, civil society and citizen journalism in the Crimea. It precedes the parliamentary dimension of the Crimean Platform, the first parliamentary summit of the International Crimea Platform, which will be held on 24th to 25th October 2022 in Zagreb, Croatia. Therefore, we seek to engage PACE members today who signed a statement of the Ukrainian delegation on the Crimean Platform initiative. PACE has recognized the situation in Ukraine and occupied Crimea in previous resolutions and recommendations to the Committee of Ministers. Today, however, we want to refocus attention on human rights violations in the peninsula since Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine, which need a strong international response. A few organizational remarks. Most speakers will talk in Ukrainian, and we have English simultaneous translation available, so please just use your headphones if needed. The event will be live streamed on Facebook and YouTube and on the websites of SMINA and Human Rights House Foundation. After contributions by all our speakers, we hopefully have time for a short Q&A, and we end with a short lunch with Crimean Tatar snacks available outside. Let me turn now first to our distinguished speakers and co-hosts for short welcoming remarks before we hear our civil society panelists. It's my pleasure to turn to Ambassador Borys Tarasiuk, permanent representative of Ukraine to the Council of Europe. Dear Ambassador, you have the floor.
Dear Chairperson of the Ukrainian Delegation, dear Mariia, dear participants of this side event, first of all, I would like to express gratitude to Human Rights Center SMINA for organizing this important side event. Russian aggression has started back in 2014 from the attempt to annex Crimea. Despite the continued full-scale aggression of the Russian Federation, we should not forget about deterioration of the human rights situation in the peninsula. Since 24th February, when Russia unleashed its full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, the human rights situation has deteriorated drastically throughout occupied Crimea. For the first time since 2016, the practice of enforced disappearances has returned. Unprecedented pressure has been exerted on independent lawyers, as well as harsh persecution of journalists and human rights activists. Harassment and administrative prosecution for pro-Ukrainian or anti-war views, militarization of education, illegal mobilization are also ongoing. The issue of violation of human rights in Crimea remains in the field of view of the Council of Europe. On June 15 this year, the second decision of the Committee of Ministers regarding the situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Ukraine, was adopted. On August 23 this year, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe took part in the online summit of the Crimean platform. In her speech, she noted that the Council of Europe is proud of its participation in the Crimea platform and remains steadfast in its commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, including its consistent rejection of the illegal annexation of Crimea. The parliamentary summit of the Crimean platform, which will be held on Zagreb on October 25th, will be an excellent continuation of this initiative. I hope that this side event will be productive and you will be able to hear about Ukrainian human rights organizations' new broad spectrum research and their monitoring and documentation of efforts on human rights violations in the Crimea. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarasiuk, also for co-hosting this event today. Our second speaker and co-host today is Mariia Mezentseva, Chairperson of Ukrainian Delegation to PACE. Dear Mrs. Mezentseva, please for your welcoming words.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends, Your Excellency, Ambassador, and everyone who joined us today. I have obviously changed a little bit my speaking notes and bullet points from the perspective of what has been ongoing from early morning across all the territories and regions of Ukraine. The shellings, numerous bombardings, the Iran kamikaze drones, crying children in the basements, people who were going to work and got burned in their cars in the city center of Kiev. All that we are witnessing across the globe via the TV channels like this, which is transmitting our today's event. But we know that there will be no post, no event, no statement that will release this pain or will try to show how painful it is for all of us. Regardless of all that, we are here, and I will focus on something that the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has done and is able still to do in the future. Point number one is something very, very simple. The unprovoked war of Russia against Ukraine, which started from an illegal attempt of annexation of Crimean Peninsula, was the start. Back in March 2014 was illegal referenda, not referendum, which we have been witnessing in 4 regions of Ukraine quite recently. And it has to stop with Crimea as well. These territories have to be back to Ukraine, as it is stipulated in international law. And we are so proud to have the citizens of Crimea here with us today. And I hope that the Crimean Tatars, indigenous people of Crimea who are watching us, hopefully online, can also feel this support. We have passed this law on indigenous people in Ukrainian parliament, which was misinterpreted by Russia, saying that Russians are also the indigenous people of Ukraine. Well, they have to learn international law, and we will teach them a lesson. Colleagues, back in recent sessions of the PACE, we have proposed a small but very important amendment on international tribunal. The crime of aggression, the invasion of Russian forces into Ukraine, including the peninsula of Crimea, is a mother crime of all crimes, and it has to be taken very seriously. What we are proposing is to engage all member countries of the Council of Europe and beyond, everyone who would want to join this initiative, to prosecute Putin and his nearest counterparts at political and military level who caused these numerous war crimes which we are facing now. And we hope that the resolution, which will follow the current debate on Thursday, following the President Zelensky address, will comprise a clear call on creation of this tribunal. We highly salute and very thankful for those members who are also present right now here of the Parliamentary Assembly who joined the Crimean platform last year. And actually, colleagues, you were the last ones who saw with your own eyes and who stepped on the soil of the demarcation line before the peninsula Crimea and the temporary occupied area of the Kherson region. Colleagues, we highly salute also the resolution that was passed in 2021 not without your support, of course, and it was highly on demand, but not very clear for the decision to be taken in the first place. So we had to fight to put it in the agenda of this Council of Europe. I think it is very clear today that Crimea is Ukraine, and this is out of question. We have to promote the fact that we have items on the agenda and we have instruments which we can use for this fight. The fight of diplomacy is not less important than the fight of the military, and we are highly thankful that you join these efforts and forces with us. I would like to pay a tribute for every Ukrainian, every Crimean Tatar who is now in prison, who cannot hear our words, but he and she can hear that our efforts and our mission is with them. And as we saw today, the Havel Prize nominee granted to our friend Mr. Kara-Murza, who is also imprisoned, but also there are so many Crimean Tatars and Crimean citizens who are Ukrainians who are waiting for the release. In these efforts, colleagues, my last point to call is to join the efforts on the release of all political prisoners and war prisoners which Russia is captured by misusing the Geneva Convention, and call on International Red Cross for more efforts, to call for UN for more efforts, and to the Council of Europe for more joint efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your strong welcoming words. A further member of the Ukrainian delegation to PACE is Yevheniia Kravchuk, member of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. Mrs. Kravchuk, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I am grateful for all of you coming to this event. And the name of this event might be, very sad, Crimea in Darkness. But we need to remember that the darkest night is before the dawn. And believe us, we have not been closer to liberation of Crimea than we are here now, 8 years later. Today you will hear the personal stories. Now in this room we have also together with us our defenders and the families of our defenders from Azovstal. They are also captives in Russian prisons. As Nariman Dzhelyal, who was on Crimean platform just last year, and he was imprisoned just for coming to Crimean platform, just to saying that Crimea is Ukraine. You will hear the story of his wife. And I'm sure, as my colleague said, that it has to be, to end with Crimea. Crimea was a starting point in 2014 when, very sad, the world turned a blind eye on this illegal annexation, and Putin decided he can go and step further. We have to be brave. Ukrainians are brave right now, and the whole civilized world has to be brave to make sure that Ukraine wins in this war. Ukraine restores its territorial integrity together with Crimean Peninsula, and bringing people who had to leave Crimea right now back to their homes. I would like to ask you not to forget about the topic of Crimea, and of course we probably will see some of you in Zagreb in just a few weeks for the first parliamentary Crimean platform, speaking more about human rights, about people, what they suffer in Crimea. So again, I'm grateful for your support. And the last but not the least, we need to make sure that right now, we see the people that are in prisons. We need to make sure that those who started this war will end up in prison, will end up at international tribunal. And only then we will see that justice can win. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, live online, we hear from Tamila Tasheva, permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. She will tell us about how it is to work from exile, and on recent trends of reprisals against Crimean Tatars. Tamila, I hope you can hear us online, and we look forward to listening to you.
Yes, thank you. Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Greetings, dear colleagues. I hope that you can hear English interpretation. Unfortunately, I cannot see if it works or not. First of all, I would like to greet all of you that this event was possible. This is a very important event. You know, today I am in such, sweater with a hood, even though I wanted to be with you in the official dress. But you know, today in the entire country we have mass shelling in the city of Kyiv. This air raid last signal lasted for 5 hours, 37 minutes. We understand that the representative of authorities, all representative and leadership of political authorities and military, we need to be ready. We can say that's an agony of the Kremlin authorities that do everything possible, not only to make everything to show us, not only against Crimea, but also they do that against the entire Ukrainian population. Talking about the Crimea, I would like to talk about a couple of things. First, that's illegal mobilization that's happening right now on the territory of the peninsula. It started on the September 21st this year. In Crimea, it started at once. During the first couple of days of this mobilization campaign on the territory of Crimea, over 1,500 mobilization letters were given to people to come to the points of gathering to go to the army. First of all, that was not only against the Crimean Tatar population, but also Ukrainian. It's a standard practice of Russians. So I would like to repeat again, so that the mobilization campaign is still going on, and it's targeting the representatives of the indigenous people, Crimean Tatars of Ukraine. Also, I would like to say that after the start of this mobilization campaign, a lot of people are leaving the territory of Crimea. Unfortunately, they have to leave Crimea through the Russian Federation. Then they are going to the territory of some third countries. There is a trend that I need to mention about. It's still persecution of anti-war activists on the territory of the peninsula. We are monitoring since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion these protests, these rallies. But it is only the tip of the iceberg. I think that 150 of different acts of the persecution of the activists, we see it, and based on the information of so-called Crimean courts, I would like to mention that one of the names is Bogdan Ziza, and his only crime was that he spelled the yellow and blue color paint in front of the administration building. He could be for 20 years beyond the bars. He is judged by 3 articles. One is the administration codex. That's the first one, discreditation of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It was introduced into the Russian legislation from the first days of the full-scale invasion. That's Article 120.3.3, the administrative code of the Russian Federation. And as I mentioned before, we know that at least 50, we have the 50 cases of such a persecution, but we know there are much more. Even Ukrainian music is persecuted. To date, we have Leviza Dzhelyalova, Yevheniia Kravchuk mentioned already. She can talk in more details about the case of her husband. He was detained when he came back to the territory of Peninsula after the Crimean platform. He, together with the president and other leaders, opened the first meeting of the Crimean platform that I represent as well. We have to fight for his release and also for other people that are detained on the territory of Crimea or are taken out of to the Russian Federation. Again, I would like to stress we have 150 political detainees. 111 are Crimean Tatars. And probably the last thing that I would like to say about that is that the Russian Federation uses Crimea for their illegal activities, also with regard to the new occupied territories or new taken territory that have been taken by them, Kherson, Zaporizhia regions. People are being detained, kidnapped on the territory of Kherson region and illegally being taken to the territory of Crimea. And we have also testimony that some people that have been kidnapped, among them the foreign people, are in Simferopol detention center and city of Sevastopol. Without doubt, Ukraine will be victorious in this war. And of course, the victory will mean the liberation of all Ukrainian territories. Ukraine will choose own way to return the territories with the diplomatic elements, military elements. It's our way, it's our road, because we will not return only our territories, we return our people, like Nariman Dzhelyal, like Bogdan Dida, as a Sergiy Mustafayev, and persecution of human rights, the military war crimes. These people will be prosecuted only after we win. But what we need for that, again, weapons, weapons, and weapons, so we can protect human rights in the entire region. Thank you.
Tamila, we will go deeper into the situation now as we hear from our distinguished experts from Ukraine and Crimea, and they present testimonies on the current situation also for civil society on the ground. I'm very happy to have Tetiana Kurmanova with us today from our partner, the Crimean Human Rights Group, member of the Human Rights House Crimea. Tetiana, the Crimean Human Rights Group just issued a new review on the current human rights situation in Crimea. You will tell us more about the trends regarding freedom of expression and what we see now also in newly occupied territories we have seen in Crimea already before. Thank you.
Greetings to all. I represent the Crimean Human Rights Group, a public organization of human rights defenders, journalists who have been documenting human rights violations and war crimes in occupied Crimea for 8 years. And all this 8 years, we informed the international community about how Russia systematically, step by step, implements the policy of genocide of Ukrainians. And you see today what happened. Dozens of rockets got into Ukrainian cities. Starting in 2014, Russia experimented with the minds of Ukrainian society, and they started from Crimea, and they started that with the crime against the freedom of media, against media. That was a total purge of independent media, curtailment of freedom of speech, freedom of work of journalists. Conditions were created under which independent media cannot exist right now in Crimea. Russia currently applies harsh legislation and violation of international humanitarian norms. For all these 8 years in Crimea, independent journalists have been subjected to systemic pressure and criminal prosecution and fabricated cases. And right now, no one can think differently. As Ms. Tasheva said, they are being punished if you are for peace, if you have a dress with yellow and blue colors, even if you put manicure and these colors, it's also is being prosecuted. They had at least 3 new laws infringing the rights of people. They introduced them from the very beginning. Right now, we told that Russia will not stop. We are talking about it for 8 years, and we were right. The Russia did not stop. They only in peninsula. All these infringements were used also in the new territories. We see rapes, we see tortures, we see forcible disappearance, kidnapping. We see it in the new occupied territories in Kherson and Zaporizhia region. As you have seen today, and news today, life of each Ukrainian is now as like lottery, because we don't know if we're going to live to get to tomorrow. That's why we don't want to hear these calls for dialogues with Russia, because you know, if the bear, the wild bear, is attacking you, you will not talk with and negotiate what you want to be bitten off your hand or your leg. That's why the Ukrainians, they live practically on the fringe of stress. My friend that should have been here right now, he is in the Ukrainian army. He defends us. That's why I am here. So some people, instead of being the advocates for human rights, they are physically defending our country. Practically, Ukrainians fight now for the rights of the entire humankind, and they fight with weapons in their hand. We are an outpost of the whole world. That's what Ukraine needs, more weapon to protect human rights. And there's not just empty words, because human rights, it's a system of values, and the base of it, it's justice. And the entire world, I hope so, this 8 years, you have seen that nothing will be achieved by talking about the dialogue with the aggressor. If the crimes committed by Russia are kept silent, there will be even more blood and death. Therefore, I ask you all to react on the large scale. In particular, I am talking a bit as a representative of our humanitarian organization. We need to fight for our values. This is freedom, justice, and equality. And we believe that Crimea will soon be liberated and our enemy will be defeated. Thank you.
Turn to Anastasia Martynovska, working for the Regional Center for Human Rights. She is also, the Regional Center for Human Rights is also a member of the Ukraine 5am coalition. Anastasia, you will tell us about the situation, especially of political prisoners, and please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Noah. Dear participants of these events, today I would like to pay your attention to the situation with the persecution of lawyers in Crimea. The suppression of the human rights movement in Crimea has been going since the first day of occupation. Restriction of local Ukrainian laws on practicing law, encouragement by Russian authorities to move a large number of Russian lawyers to the peninsula, and finally, the physical prosecution of disloyal lawyers. The category of disloyal includes a small number of the lawyers in peninsula who continue to provide qualified and high-quality legal defense in politically motivated cases. The Russian authorities use the following instrument of pressure on lawyers: engage the media to create an image of unqualified populist. Occupied judges in politically motivated cases file complaints against the lawyer with the Occupied Bar Association, which may deprive them of the right to practice law. The lawyers are monitored and their phone conversations are tapped. They are summoned for so-called educational conversation of Investigative Committee of Russian Federation. Illegal search in lawyer's office. They are threatened with criminal prosecutions. Lawyers are even arrested for their profession. At the same time, the occupied authorities seem to be testing the reaction of the world. When lawyer Emil Kurbedinov was first arrested in 2017, these events caused considerable resonance both in Ukraine and internationally. Then the Russian detained lawyers from time to time to check the world reaction. It was in 2018, in 2024, and now in 2022, as the world turned his attention to the grave war crimes taking place elsewhere in Ukraine, Russia turned with renewed vigor to its shameful action in occupied Crimea. In May, 4 lawyers detained received fines and administrative arrest. It was Emil Semedlyaev, Nazim Shekhmambetov, Aider Avzamatov, and Emine Avamilova. In July, 3 lawyers were deprived of their status and possibility to practice law in Crimea: Lilia Gemidji, Rustem Kamilyaev, and Nazim Shekhmambetov. This situation led to the fact that there are practically no lawyers left in Crimea who are ready to protect rights of the people in politically motivated case. In addition, the occupation authorities systematically violated the right of lawyers and their clients. They denial of access to the case files, the exclusively completed procedure of admitting authorities to the place of detention, violates the rights of confidential meetings with the clients. They are not allowing a lawyer even to visit their clients. For example, on 11 August 2022, during numerous searching in the homes of Crimean Muslims, at least 9 lawyers had their cell phone blocked at all. All these actions of Russian Federation are primarily aimed at preventing access to the defense of the person subjected to the political motivated persecution. Today, we would like to draw your attention at the fact that Crimea remained occupied territory. The Russian Federation continues to violate human rights on the peninsula, and the people of Crimea remain hostages of the Russian Federation in this war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. We also have 2 family members of political prisoners amongst our panelists today. First, online from Kiev, we have Leviza Dzhelyalova with us, wife of political prisoner and first deputy of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar People, Nariman Dzhelyal, who was recently sentenced to 17 years in prison. Leviza, you have the floor online. Please use your headphones to hear her. Thank you.
Greetings, distinguished participants. I am a wife of the detained Crimean journalist, the first deputy of the Crimean journalist, on the 21st of September of 2022, the Russian court sentenced, and also among them were other 2 activists of the movement to the 15, 17, 13 years of prison in the colony. General Nariman was arrested on the 4th of September 2021 after he came back from Kyiv after the first summit of the Crimean platform. There he talked about the situation in Crimea, about the facts of infringement of human rights violation, also infringement of rights of the Crimean people without any reason, without any documents that supported this case. There was no reason at all to arrest him. Also, I would like to say that openly the Crimean authorities threatened people who wanted to participate in the Crimean platform. But Nariman, he realized that he has to do that. Despite of these threats, he went to Kyiv. Of course, not only his participation in Crimean platform, but also his work as a journalist, as the advocate of human rights, rights of the Crimean population, territorial territory of Ukraine, preservation of the territory of Ukraine, was also the reason for his arrest. Besides that, Dzhelyalov Nariman is recognized among the Crimean Tatars in the Russian authority for a long time wanted to limit his influence among his people, and right now they decided in the illegal way completely isolate him. During the court proceeding, of Nariman in Brothers Vachtenov, they have documented a lot of procedural documents, and you can say that this was falsification. Talking about the case of Nariman, Hassan, Aziz, they had psychological, physical pressure, and they have openly talked about it. Artem Hassan was kidnapped from his own house first. It was said, the charges were that he raped someone. Later on, he was brought to the house where he was tortured with an electrical cable. Then he was taken to the forest. They shoot in the air, threatening him, killing him, and also threatening about having torture his wife and the children. Aziz also was kidnapped during the night. The same building. They have falsificated that his brother was killed because they wanted to force him to give statement that was already prepared on the paper. After this torture, they had to lie about themselves and Narimanov. Lawyers that were given by the FSB, KGB, were not complying with their functions. They practically aided and abated the FSB. And if the next of kin families wanted to protect their lives and gave them the real lawyers, they denied all the charges. They only based their cases on the cases that were provided by the three protected, hidden testimonies, the people that practically are liars. They cannot be the testimony that was always thought out. We don't have any personal data of these so-called witnesses. The people didn't have any rights to protect themselves, to defend themselves, to give their own versions. Furthermore, the investigation was not supported by some real documentation. But unfortunately, the court took this into account and accepted this as a witness testimony as a real cases. That's a violation of the international legislation. Nariman said all this is targeted to have more even repression of the Crimean Tatars and Ukrainian citizens in Crimea. Of course, on our side, we are going to do everything possible. All legal rights will be protected. But we understand, based on the political situation, nothing will give the results. That's why we really count on the political international actions, the attention paid by the diplomats of the international organizations, journalists, etc. So I appeal to you and use all influence you have on the Russian Federation to stop this political repression in Crimea and liberation of the political people, Assam, Aziz, Ijeman, and Nariman. Thank you very much for your attention.
Leviza. It's also my pleasure now to turn to Olena Tsyhipa, wife of the abducted activist from Nova Kakhovka in the Kherson region, Sergiy Tsyhipa. Olena, you have the floor.
Добрий день. Дуже вдячна.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am very happy, grateful for the opportunity to speak before you today. I am a volunteer of the human rights organization ZMINA. I want to tell you about the violent and unlawful disappearance of citizens in the occupied New Kakhovka, Nova Kakhovka. Nova Kakhovka, it's geographically located near Crimea. That's why it was already occupied in the first hours of occupation on February 21st. All residents that live in Nova Kakhovka are in constant fear, stress, and depression because people could be stopped on the streets, kidnapped for their apartments. They, can be stopped during the day and the night. The person could be taken with bags on their heads. They are kept in basements, mocked, tortured, blackmailed. The people are psychologically pressured, blackmailed. Some people are coming back home in very, very depressed state of mind. There are cases of forcible kidnapping of school principals, educators, businessmen, farmers, former Afghan soldiers, and also the representatives of city self-government. Such a fighter for the people's right, human rights, free speech, freedom of assembly was my husband Sergiy Tsyhipa, who was forcibly kidnapped on one of the block posts between Nova Kakhovka and Tarasiuk. He was kidnapped on March 12, 2022, and we know for sure that now he is in the occupied Crimea in the detention center #1 of Simferopol, and I am appalled, I am outraged that I didn't have any telephone communication with my husband. No information was given, no official information about his whereabouts. I have information only from the unofficial sources, where is my husband and what is done to him. That's why I appeal to all citizens of the international community to press on the occupational authorities in Crimea to allow me at least once to talk to my husband, to learn what he is incriminated in, why he is persecuted. I would like you to develop a mechanism of influence on the authorities of Crimea by all available means in order to release all victims of violent abduction and return them to the controlled territories of Ukraine. You know, the families of these people are also in danger. They need an assistance, psychological, juridical, legal. They need some support. Thank you very much for your attention, and we really hope for your support. Thank you.
I would like to say that reflecting on today's event, it has demonstrated that we are facing extensive human rights violations in Crimea, ongoing extensive human rights violations, which even accelerated in the last months. I would like to therefore repeat our condemnation of the ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine, and we reiterate our call on Council of Europe member states and the PACE to support human rights defenders, their lawyers and their families in Ukraine, and all victims of human rights violations in occupied territories by Russia. It remains crucial to hold those responsible for human rights violations fully accountable. I would like to conclude this event by thanking all the speakers and participants for their time, and by thanking PACE members and Council of Europe delegations for their support of this event. A big thank you also to our interpreter for making this possible today.